Hello and welcome to my couch. Today we are going to kind of debunk a video that I've been sent not just now, but have been consistently debunking since about like 10 years ago when I first wrote about it on Ask an Entomologist.
So you have soupy nothingness, basically, and then you turn into this butterfly.
You rebuild.
And they can remember things from when they were pre-soup.
So this video always, or this blog post, or this Tumblr post always talks about how the caterpillar can be shocked as a caterpillar and remember being shocked as an adult, but completely turns into goo in the chrysalis. However, that is based on outdated information. Yes, that experiment did happen. We do see these results between caterpillars and adults, like things that are learned by the caterpillar as a caterpillar can be remembered as the butterfly. However, in the chrysalis, they're not turning 100% into goop. And there was a really important study that came out around 2014 that showed some of what was happening in the insect. Yes, it is true that some muscles, for example, are being completely broken down and restructured, and there is some reconstitution of the tissues that are found within the insect, but the whole insect does not just turn into a puddle of goo. Let's start in the caterpillar itself. Most of these studies have been done in Drosophila, so fruit flies. Yes, flies go under complete metamorphosis and have a pupal stage as well. Lots of insects have pupal stages like beetles and ants, bees, and wasps, and even some insects that you probably never even heard of before called the net-winged insects all undergo complete metamorphosis. So they have a larval stage, a chrysalis, cocoon, or pupal stage, however you want to call it, and then the adult stage. Inside the larva, the caterpillar, in the case of butterflies, you have very specific tissues called imaginal discs. These tissues will become the adult structure, but you find them already predetermined within the larva. So a leg imaginal disc will always be a leg. A forewing will always be a forewing. A hindwing will always be a hindwing. Antenna, eyes, etc., etc. And so these tissues are found within the larva and then go under rapid development within the chrysalis. So that's step one. We already have the predetermined structures found within the larva. They just need to grow up into their adult structures, essentially. Two, we find that within the chrysalis, there are mainly it's the tracheal system and the gut that was studied because that's what would show up on the MRI when they threw chrysalises essentially into an MRI machine to see what was going on. And the tracheal system we find changes significantly. The caterpillar doesn't really need a lot of air. It's just like hanging out on some leaves and eating some leaves. So it doesn't need a lot of oxygen to its muscles. So the tracheal system is actually really simple and not that complicated. We find that in the chrysalis, instead of completely disintegrating, the tracheal system just undergoes some changes where it becomes a little bit more complicated, and you can see how it will be providing more oxygen to the muscles, especially the flight muscles. Similarly, we see that the gut, which is used to eating a lot of leaves, which needs to be really big because eating leaves is really complicated. We can see this a lot in herbivores in general. Generally, herbivores have big digestive systems and carnivores have smaller digestive systems because leaves are kind of a crappy food source and difficult to get energy from. So caterpillars have a giant stomach because they are just crunching through leaves all day and need to extract as much energy as possible because once they reach the chrysalis stage, they can't eat. So all of the energy that they need for that transformation has to be obtained when they're a larva. And since leaves are kind of crappy food sources, they need to eat a lot of it, and they need a big gut to extract every molecule of energy they possibly can out of it. So we see that the gut changes. It gets from a very large gut to a relatively small gut, and that's because the butterfly is eating a higher nutritious food source, usually fruits or sugars or sometimes blood, depending on the butterfly and or moth. Yes, there are blood-feeding moths. Surprise. Anyway, that's a video from a different day. So you're moving from a low energy food source to a high energy food source, and you need that high energy food source because now you're flapping around, and flapping around takes a lot of energy. So you can tell that these structures aren't completely being dissolved and regrown. They're just changing the construction a little bit. Now on to, can caterpillars remember what has happened to them? Yes, we did this by literally presenting a smell to them and then shocking the caterpillar, and then it's like, ow, that hurts. So it remembers the smell with being shocked. And then the adult butterfly remembers that smell and has an adverse reaction because it doesn't want to be shocked, right? So there is some evidence to suggest that at least maybe the central nervous system isn't completely disintegrating either, because you would have to maintain those memories in some sort of neural network. A study that came out in 2021 does suggest that there is a significant amount of programmed cell death. So the nervous system has to rearrange significantly, but it seems that much of the nervous system, especially the central nervous system, remains relatively intact. And that makes sense, right? Because if you're a caterpillar, you're just like this long tube and just like, wiggling around, versus now you have all of these big legs to move around, and you have big eyes that you need to receive information from, and now you have wings that you need to coordinate and flap around. And insects' nervous systems work very differently than humans. Like, everything is done in our brain, and all of the information is sent to our brain, to like our peripheries. However, insects have little ganglions or little nerve clusters along the body that are doing the movement. That's why if you cut off a cockroach's head, it can still run around and essentially be relatively okay, because the central nervous system, the brain part, is just responsible for like learning and taking information in from the eyes and taking information in from the antennae. So is it true that the insect turns 100% into goo? I mean, it is a gooey process, but many insect tissues are still conserved. They're just changed around a little bit. So when you hear this, like, oh yes, the insect completely turns into goo and then comes out as an adult on the other side, that's not necessarily true. Many of the core features and many of the core structures do remain. They're just rearranged slightly. So I hope that you found that interesting and you learned a little bit about what happens inside a butterfly chrysalis.